Welcome to this edition of Locker Room Chat, brought to you by the Shanneman Sports Museum of Tacoma, Pierce County, and Rainier Asphalt and Concrete, the #1 asphalt and concrete repair contractor in Tacoma and the Seattle area. For quality workmanship, top-notch customer service, contact Rainier Asphalt at rainierasphalt.com and let them know you heard about them on the Locker Room Chat. It's great to have you back. Gary Hill here, along with Jim Kittilsby. It's part 2 of our conversation. Jim, there's so much left to talk about. We left off in part 1 of the conversation. We were talking about the Seattle Pilots. I want to go back to the very beginning of the pilot situation, because I'm not sure if everyone realizes at the time how the move to, as you mentioned, the move to Oakland from Kansas City impacted the Seattle Pilots. The Pilots were originally supposed to play in 71 or 72, but the timetables actually moved up. So granted a franchise in December of 1967 and actually played in 1969. How did that change the dynamics of the situation for you and everyone in the Pilots front office?
Well, I suppose in a way it probably helped the Sorianos in that, again, as underfinanced as they were and would be. I mean, even when they were underway, and that gave them a little bit more time. I mean, it just well, they were wonderful people. I think if these people were still living in that, because that was so many years ago, not many of us left. Bob Schoenbachler was the chief financial officer in that, and he and I were subject of a book that came out 2 years ago, and the book was written by a Seattle, a Tacoma man, Rick Allen, who is known through the business community because he was executive director of the United Fund, United Way, and that. And turns out he was a baseball fan, which I didn't realize in that at the time. But he wrote a book, Inside Pitch, and interviewed Bob Schoenbachler, who also lives in Scottsdale, North Scottsdale, north of me, an old colleague of mine. And Bob stayed in Milwaukee longer than I did. He was a native of the Renton, Kent area and that, going up there. And he became Bud Selig's right-hand man handling finances and that. And he was even younger than me. And I met him the first day I drove in the parking lot to be on the job in 1968, first person I met. And so we're subjects to the book, and the book is considered one of the better selling baseball books of all time. And and it's not as much about baseball as it is about baseball business and that. And the only reason the book was so successful in terms of whoever rated these, I haven't the faintest idea. I don't know who was the best book or the worst book or that. But what was interesting about it is that the book, because never in the history of baseball had a team gone bankrupt in one year in that, and that how could this happen? And so Bob and I, two of the only survivors from this that could explain kind of what was happening in that monetarily. And of course, he wasn't a baseball person, but he was a very intelligent financial person in that. And he could see, Bob Schoenbachler could see that we were heading towards bankruptcy by August of the season. And he told the Sorianos that. The rest of us didn't know this. The farm director and the scouting director, we didn't know this was going to happen for a while, were talented people too. Art Parrott, farm director, Ray Swallow, the scouting director. And so we ate on site. Now you got to remember this, about this time frame, there were no cell phones. I mean, and there were no restaurants nearby, really close by, just down the street. You had to go ways to find a restaurant. So to go out and eat lunch at noon would mean we have to abandon our phones, and we'd miss calls from different time zones, from teams that wanted to talk trades and that, and I'd be answering. If Marvin Elks wasn't there, I'd answer the phone. I mean, I get calls from Charlie Finley. He's not calling me, but he'd ask for Marvin. He'd say, "This is Charles O. Finley calling." I'd say, "Well, hi, Charlie," and Marvin isn't here right now, but I'll have him call you when he gets back and that. So anyway, other teams did this and do it to this day, that they have a dining area, and they serve meals, lunch and dinner on game days and that. So we'd eat on site. So we'd only be about 100 feet away from our phones anyway, and that, and we wouldn't be gone long. I mean, we wouldn't waste a lot of time eating. We'd go in and have good meals and that. And so I'd be sitting there, maybe eating with anybody, because I knew all these people. Remember the staff, almost all the people in the front office, and these are good, competent people. I mean, good people in that. And almost all these people Soriano's hired them because he knew them from the AAA days. I mean, they'd been in Tulsa and Little Rock and minor league clubs and that. And so he'd seen them in action and that. So he was hiring people that he knew and that. And but one day Dewey came up to me and said, I think it'd be a good idea if you and Game Paul didn't sit and often just buddy with Art Perrick and Ray Swallow and that. And I said, well, this is middle of the season now. Maybe this was August, July or August. I said, why not? He said, because we're not going to renew their contracts when they end at the end of September and that. And it's going to be awkward. It's going to be awkward for you if, I mean, we still talk to them, and it's not that we ignored them. But we went in this little dining area, and that the cook's name was Alice. So it was called Alice's Restaurant, and that, and good food. I probably ate better then than I do now. And prime rib, sandwiches and stuff and that. But so that was sad. I mean, all of a sudden we knew they didn't, that what was going to happen at the end there, because they could see, by then they could see the handwriting on the wall that this wasn't going to work out. So probably by November and that, people, we started losing people in that secretarial help. I mean, if you're a secretary to the sales manager and that, there's not going to be any more ticket sales or concessions people in that. I mean, they started to go, and so we were kind of left in limbo. It was very sad. It was very, very sad. And Bill Sears had the office right next to mine, and so we shared the teletype. There was a teletype machine. I don't remember how it works now. Again, I'm low tech guy, so I knew how to run that, like a big piano kind of looking thing. And so I was the conduit between the ball club and the commissioner's office and the American League office, and that if we're going to ask players a waiver on players and that's me and that, and Milks would ask me, make sure that he knew how many more waivers were allowed for John Doe and that and stuff, and that was kind of my thing too. Hard to believe that a high school kid would buy the baseball blue book that had all the rules, but I was starting to reading about all the legalese and that on player movements and that when I was in high school and that. So I was thought of hell, like I say, except for majoring in, instead of taking French instead of Spanish, and then I kind of was on the right course on my other class selections and that, but so that didn't work out very good. So anyway, the speaking engagements and all that kind of came to an end because service groups kind of lost late in the fall, and that kind of lost interest. Like, well, Larry's inviting this guy in to talk about the demise of a major league team and that. So, but it was a great bunch of people in that. But strange things would happen in that, and it's just unfortunate.
Opening day of that year for the Pilots probably foreshadowed the whole thing that you're talking about. What do you remember about opening day for the Pilots?
Well, the firing of the player of the Speakers Bureau and that was just the start of that. But they were still painting the day before. They were painting the bleacher seats. And so we'd have fans come up to us and say, if they knew me personally, not that I knew everybody. I mean, I wasn't. Remember, I'm a bit player there. I'm not the major executive, and because I'm young, and say. I sat on the left field bleachers. He said, I think this is paint all over the seat of my pants and that. Okay, let me have your name. Give me your name and your address and that. We'll make do. If the dry cleaner can't get this out, we'll replace this and that. And seemed like that would happen later on that day. I talked to the ticket manager, Harry McCarthy, a dear friend of mine, now deceased. And I said, what's the advance sale now for the bat day when we give away the bats to the kids, Louisville Sluggers, but they were a little smaller in size, and said Seattle Pilots on them and that. And he said, well, it'll be probably this, and then the walk-up sale. I said, well, I need a figure because I used to order the equipment, Major League equipment, including the uniforms. I modeled. I am 5'7". Then I was about 160 pounds. Now I'm 5'6". I've shrunk in age, and I'm 140 pounds. But the sales manager for Wilson Sporting Goods, Soriano's always bought stuff from Wilson Sporting Goods at the time. They'd sent samples of uniform samples, and I was the model, and they would take pictures of me and that. In this uniform, and shirt and pants and that, and the caps and that, and because the samples were always size 38. Well, most of the people on the staff were bigger. Most of the men were bigger than the 38. But at the time, like say 5'7", 160, I was stocky enough to wear those. And I wasn't selected because of my rank or my importance, and that it was because they fit me. And so anyway, so I would order bats in addition to uniforms. Spring training, I ran the instructional league. I was down there by myself, the winter instructional league. I would order the gear for the fall instructional league and that. And the first year, my only claim to fame in baseball, my only claim to fame is so obtuse, it's bizarre here. Because I'm told to go to the airport to pick up some of these players that we just signed at the free agent draft. And I'd be involved in the summer draft and that. And I don't want it to sound like I picked the players, because if I selected the players, I didn't do a very good job. But I did research on the players, and the scouting director, Maddock and that would make decisions. But we get back to New York. We get back to the New York to the draft meetings. Summer, there were two drafts back then: the summer free agent draft and the secondary phase draft would be in January and that. So I'd be in New York twice and that, and so I was involved in the research and that, and the scouts, and of course I was working with the scouts, but it wasn't my sole decision who to pick and that. But anyway, here's fall league. We drafted a young kid out of New Jersey, whose name was J. Thomas Kelly. And of course, he didn't go by J and that, but I was the only one that knew what his name was. Tom Kelly, later the manager of the Minnesota Twins. He's 17 years old, and he shows up, and I pick him up at the airport, and he's got a bonus of about maybe $1,000 or something like that. And so I find him housing, and remember now, this is the Vietnam War situation and that, and players with draft numbers. If you had a low draft number, I mean, you in a certain range in that, you were suspect of the draft if you weren't in college. So here I am, a college graduate and that, in there, back in that. This is in an era, Gary, when managers, so many of the managers and the trainers, if you can believe this, it's kind of hard to believe, the trainers of that era that were very good, including our trainer that didn't even have a college degree. I mean, to be a AAA or a major league trainer and that, learning it from some other guy who was in the same situation a few years earlier, how to rub arms and do all this kind of stuff. And so we so here's the fall instructional league. And I knew people because I remember I had worked in the Giants organization previously, and the Giants would be down there and that. And the word got out that Jim Kittilsby had some ins in that, and knew, because a lot of these guys that were running the other teams that were participating in the league had no college background. They didn't know how to get players into schools and that, but I did. And that because I was young and I had just been in college and stuff. So the Giants, somebody from the Giants would call and say, Jim, we've got a couple of guys. Can you get them into Arizona State University or Mesa Community College? I said, well, I probably can. So if they look like they were in trouble with the draft, they would call me. I'd get involved in that. The other thing I had some contacts with, and I lucked out on this. I didn't know much about the military, but I had some National Guard and reserve unit connections around the country and that. So I would get players in that looked like they were vulnerable to being in the military draft, and that I would get them into reserve units, and then we'd have to arrange to fly them home once a month and that for their training weekends and that sort of a thing. And so that was kind of interesting. But Tom Kelly, nice young man. I wish I had followed his career further. He played in Tacoma. He played in Tacoma and AAA, and that he was just kind of a journeyman player in that. I didn't picture him as being a future major league manager and winning the World Series. Mm-hmm. But so anyway, he's only 17, so he's not old enough to do a lot of things. So I get him an apartment, and I enroll him at Mesa Community College and that. And I did him so they could take classes in the morning and that, but still be available in the afternoon for the practice games and everything, so they didn't miss out on much. And then he decides he wants a car. So you got to know Phoenix and that. Most of the car dealers are on our Camelback Road in between and now over in Bell, over in Peoria and that too. And then you can relate to that with the Mariner connection. But so he wants to buy a car, and he's got enough money for the down payment and that. And we ended up getting a Volvo, but I took 2 days driving him to all these used car lots and new car dealers and used car lots and that. But he's not old enough to sign the contract. So I have my only claim to baseball fame is that I co-signed the first car contract for great, still a popular figure in Minneapolis, and that later to be manager of the world champion Minnesota Twins. I co-signed for his first car and enrolled him in college and all of this stuff with that. And then later, he probably would remember me. I'd have to remind him. It'd be kind of like Gaylord Perry and the visit to the podiatrist's office. Other than that, that's what all he would remember about me.
That's so great. Well, when part one of our conversation, when we left you were getting arrested, but you never told us what happened. How? Obviously, you're out of jail now, so that's good.
Okay. So anyway, and going back, backtracking to the checks I used to write and that too. After writing these checks to 150 players, making 4 copies, one to the bankruptcy referee, one to Soriano, one to keep for myself, so I knew what I was doing, and one had to go to the accountant for Bud Selig in Milwaukee, because it looks like that's where they were going to go. And then, so a couple of weeks later, the bankruptcy referee would call, and we'd have to start all over again. I never had books of checks that said the proper upper left-handed information on it. I had to print that in 150 times and then make 600 copies of that on this copy machine that went like, most copy machines, and this, this, everybody knows this. Copy machines go rat-a-tat, 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 and shoot out 20 copies. Not mine. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I spent all my time. I don't know if I got any other work done other than writing checks and filling in corners and stuff. So anyway, so I'm arrested in that because E.B. Smith, the developer, I think he was entitled. I mean, see, remember now, I'm just a bit player in that. I mean, nobody in Seattle in the front office except the accountant, Bob Schoenbuckler, knew about what the contract was with developers in Arizona, and he treated me nice. I mean, I used to come down here, and he felt that since I was a delegate representing Dewey Soriano, that just even though I was just a young kid, and that he better treat me nice. So he'd take me out to dinner to the best restaurants and treats and that. But that ended when spring training started. I mean, he thought, oh, wait a minute, this is going down the tube and that. I'm not going to waste my time on Jim Kittilsby and that, except to lock the gates and that. And so on the getaway day, I'm just waiting for a cab, and I'm going to the airport and on this charter flight. And this sounds, I mean, this almost over exaggerates the thing. It sounds like, oh, the poor Milwaukee Brewers had to wait at the airport for hours for this goofy guy named Jim Kittilsby, because he's supposed to be on the plane. I could have taken a commercial flight. I didn't have, I mean, as it turned out, but it looked like I had plenty of time to get there. And so it wasn't like they were holding up the whole thing for me. And so I'm arrested for misappropriation of funds. E.B. Smith thought he should get a share of the concessions receipts and of the ticket sales and that. And so I didn't think about it, but when he mentioned on the warrant, E.B. Smith, I thought, oh, I know what this is about. This is about something about he's trying to stir up some more mud and stuff and that. And I said to the deputy, I said, have you followed this? It's been in the local papers. I said, we're going through bankruptcy, and the Seattle team is becoming the Milwaukee team in that. And there's a dispute between the two ownerships about the relationship with the developer and that. And I said, I can't answer all your questions. I said, well, he kind of had heard a little bit about it, but he didn't really know. I said, let me give you a phone number. You can call so-and-so. I've got the number right in front of me, the bankruptcy referee, and he can explain the whole thing to you. And he said, no, we'll just take this back to the office and that, and we'll deal with it from the other end and that. So they let me go in that, but that's my only criminal conviction that I'm aware of.
How did you find out that the pilots had been sold to Milwaukee?
Well, it kind of shows that I wasn't the highest person on the pecking order in that for to find out anything in that. Honestly, I mean, I had a radio in the office and that, and it wasn't that I was neglected. I mean, they knew it was important that I find out, because this leads to something else, and maybe this is one of your questions. If not, I'll fill us in later about how I set an all-time minor league record for releasing the most players in one day in that, because Milwaukee attorneys wouldn't let me give away the assets, the value of the contracts. That happened a little bit later. Extended spring training. I went back to open up an office in Milwaukee. Then I had to come back. I still had 39 players in camp with no place to send. That's another story. So anyway, I got off the hook on the misuse of funds and that, because I had no control of that. I explained to the guy. I said, I changed these bank accounts. This was the directive. It just wasn't some kind of a hit. Well, Jim, it might be a good idea if you close the bank account. Jim, close the bank account and open another one. And then I would say, I know, but I won't have any checks. I mean, I got to pay a lot of bills here. I won't have any checks for a long time. I had to have the right name, the right corporate name on the checks and hand printed and stuff. So anyway, that's what happened there.
How did you find out?
Oh, it's back to how did I, thank you for my prompting from my wife, found out. So this happened so quick, but we knew it was forthcoming. And of course, the tale, I mean, it's kind of, I'm not sure how true this tale, but it was partially true, that the equipment truck with all the team gear after the last game had to go someplace.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of headed towards the northeast, figuring if they just went 400 or 500 miles, then they could, if Dallas ended up being in the picture, they could just make a little angle turn and go to Dallas. If not, they were kind of headed towards Milwaukee and that. And so everything hit the fan in Seattle, and of course, with the newspapers and television and all this stuff, that was a big deal. And I don't know if they forgot to call me or not, because again, there were a lot of things that had to be done down here in Arizona and so I heard it on the radio. I had the news on and say a special news bulletin. The Seattle Pilots have gone through bankruptcy and are being moved to Milwaukee to become the Milwaukee Brewers. And we kind of knew this was happening, was going to happen. No, but really, I didn't know for sure, or when. I didn't know when, but yeah. So I heard it on the radio. But again, it wasn't that I was important to find out, but I had to find out again because I still have all these players now. I mean, somebody had to tell me something.
That's amazing. And then it was so close to the beginning of the season for the Brewers.
Well, just a week before. And so I actually saw the opening day, the parade, and the opening day in Milwaukee and we were staying at the Sheraton Schrader Hotel. We had kind of a nice deal in Milwaukee. I mean, we all had a nice hotel, and we all had private rooms and kind of a sort of a, I wouldn't call it, I would call it unlimited expense account. We had a couple car rented, so we'd carpool it to a few of us. There were only about 6 of us that were invited to go, and most of us in player personnel. And Bill Sears, who later on, of course, held a significant position with the county and that as in PR and that in Seattle, and that was part of it. And but it was. So we would eat together. We were kind of clannish in that. I mean, for a while there, because and then they knew that I had commitments. I had decided to go to PLU, but they needed me in Milwaukee because the free agent draft and that, and June and that, and so I said I'll stay through the draft and negotiations with players, minor league players in the draft, and my other duties in that. So I stayed for bulk of the season in that. But I had stuff to do if I was going to do these, and I didn't have to do these, but if I was going to put together radio packages and all this, I had ambitions. So I taught classes and stuff at PLU, and I had, and so there were just things that I needed to get back to campus and that in this new job that was more than 1.0. And that, I mean. I later taught in the master's program. The Washington State University had a master's program in sports administration. So I was invited over there to teach a class one summer and baseball coach and manage all the games and that. And they'd never had awards banquets and that. So I came up with some outlandish things called Pluto Awards, Pacific Lutheran University Traumatic Occurrences in Athletics, and that because I knew that students wouldn't show up for something serious just at the college level, just to see some people that they knew get their letter awards to that. I thought, no, we'll have to do something crazy in that. So kind of a Don Rickles type of thing that imitation. Pardon? So anyway, back to Milwaukee and that. So I enjoyed my time in Milwaukee, but I had to get back again to deal with what they still call extended spring training. What are you going to do, Gary, when you opened up all your minor league clubs and that? AAA Portland, and we were Jacksonville and AA and Clinton, Illinois, and A, and we had a team up in upstate New York, the Newark co-pilots and that. When you fill all those and their season gets underway and you still have 39 players left in camp, some of them were experienced players and they weren't even eligible to play at some of these leagues. They had too much experience. But I mean, if you're the player, Gary, at that, I mean, there's trouble ahead because there's no place for you to play and that. So we waited, and I talked to the Milwaukee attorneys and they said, Jim, you can't release them because the assets that we bought from, other than the bats and balls and that, and the goodwill of the Seattle Pilots and that, are the value of the players and that, and just can't give away players in that. And I said, there's no place for them to play. There's no place. There's no teams left. No teams left. And so I thought they'll destroy the place. La Mancha, my new dormitory that I'd read in that, they're going to destroy this place. So finally, the attorneys called and said, you can release them. What normally happens, Gary, even probably to this day, is that meetings are held after workouts in the spring at the major league and minor league level, and we'll talk about players, and we'll talk about Gary Hill. Gee, Gary had an error today, but he had 2 base hits in that, and he's kind of on the fence here. What are we going to do here? And if somebody spoke up on your behalf, you'd stay another day, and we talk about you again the next day, and you might have a good day next couple of days. Then you're probably home free. I mean, you'd be playing, but but you have to release players and move players as you go. You can't wait till the last day of the season of the spring training and that. You just gradually you pare them down. But I still had 39 left, so they decided that I could release them. So probably still to this day they have notices, and of course I had authorized signature for all the player deals, and that so they have what is called or was called disposition notices and that. So I'd have to prepare 39 disposition notices, and I arranged for the charter bus that we had to pick up the players at the dormitory and told them to have all their possessions. And I told the bus driver they're not going back there because I was afraid they'd trash the place and that. And so they came to the ballpark, and I would meet them one by one. And here comes Gary Hill, and I say, sorry, Gary, but there's no place for you to play. And here's your disposition notice, and I have for you, because you have to provide coach transportation to the city nearest their hometown. So if you live in Ellensburg, I'll give you a plane ticket, the value of a plane ticket to Seattle or to Yakima or something, wherever we're supposed, and any money that I owe you in that, and disposition notice. So I'd sign it, and they would sign it. They'd respond to it and sign it, and then they'd have to call. Then it was called, this, the National Association office, then the minor league office in St. Petersburg, Florida, and tell them. I said, I'm kind of late. I'm probably the last team that would have any minor league player movements at this time of the year. Like it was probably May, yeah, almost May. And I said, but I've got 39 players here that I'm releasing today. And the guy on the phone says, 39 players, Jim, in one day? He said, that would be unofficially a minor league record. No one has ever released 39 players in one day. I said, that's another. I said, well, another blot on my career. So anyway, we got them all the disposition notices signed and handed out, and the money's in that. They went to the airport. Nothing was destroyed, and they didn't take long. I mean, if you were one of those players, I mean, you'd get the message real quick. I mean, no one would have to tell you that there's no place for you to play and you can get released. And I would hope that maybe you get a tryout with some other team, that somebody would take a chance on you. But again, if you had played for 2 or 3 years and played as high as AA or that, I mean, you can't play in an A league, because we'll have all those leagues, and probably still do have limits on how many players experience can you have on the roster. You couldn't have the Everett Aqua Sox play with some guy that's played 4 years in AA. I mean, it just doesn't work. And it's not fair. It doesn't make sense. So anyway, that's what happened with that. So yeah, crazy.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you left Milwaukee to go back to PLU, and you had such a wonderful career at PLU. You're in the Lutz Hall of Fame. Yeah, the baseball press box is named after you. What are you most proud of when you think about all your time that you spent at PLU?
Well, I just enjoyed the people and that. We still, my wife Karen and I still associate. There's still a number of people on that that were at PLU at the time, and socially we still see them. The then athletic director, Dr. David Olson, and he was succeeded by the guy who was he has his PhD also, Paul Hoseth, who later became the athletic director and dean of the School of Physical Education. We still see them socially and talk to them on the phone and exchange Christmas cards and stuff with them and that. So the people, because I knew the people there, but it was fun because Gary, I brought this all on by myself when I talk about, nowhere would it ever appear that some part-time job was worth, I just invented that. But when you do all these things and that, and you're teaching classes, teaching like interim classes, bizarre classes and that, and I concoct these things and team teaching and that with like sports facilities. We taught a class, one team taught a class with the Dean of the School of Physical Education, but I organized it, called The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. Well, it's a kind of a spiritual takeoff on that. And the provost laughed and said, I'll let you go do it this time, but don't pull this one again on me, Jim. The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. It was a study of sports facilities for physical education majors they're going to be teaching in the public schools or in the private schools and that. And so we'd go to the swimming pools and that, like then I think it was new then, whatever year that was, I don't remember what year it was, but the swimming pool in Federal Way and the Olympic, beautiful, fabulous pool. And so we take them there so they could see if they were involved in the program that had swimming pools and that. They could they would know something about construction and locker rooms and all this. And the Kingdom, we were still talking about the Kingdom for baseball and that, and other and classy high school facilities and that, so they'd have a better understanding in that. And then I taught a class one year by myself, an interim, called Ball Games, Bond Issues, and P.T. Barnum, about hokey promotions and that, trying to impress on would-be future high school teachers that don't feel sorry for yourself and that because you're in high school and you don't get much ink in the newspapers or much attention on radio or television and that. I said, always keep in mind there are going to be feature opportunities if you think about it and that. How about if you're a women's coach in that and women's swimming in that, and you have triplets on the swim team in that? The media would jump at that, all over that. And you might just be successful and you could, but just don't feel sorry for yourself. Send them your schedule and tell them, or send them a little thing, or have somebody send them a little bit about your team. It looks like we have a chance to place at state this year in women's cross country and just from the human interest standpoint and that. So that's what I taught. That's what I taught at Washington State University and that was a lot of fun. Here I am with a bachelor's degree, teaching in a master's program, and only because they had heard about me and the pro background fit in and that. But to answer your question, I created a kind of a monstrosity in that because I came in and while I was going to be the sports publicist, I knew I could do that because I'd done that before. I was no stranger to doing stuff like that, and coaching baseball and that. I wasn't the greatest baseball coach in the world, but we were better. I was better than my predecessor. I had a better record than my predecessor, but it wasn't very good. And but I had no job description, so I could do whatever I wanted to. But I had such a fertile imagination that I wanted to do all kinds of things, and it took a long time to do and manage the work-study program for everybody that worked around the gym and the swimming pool and that. And so between teaching and then this is how, and Mark Blau enters in, because you and Mark Blau, of course, have a relationship again, and both alums at of the same high school. And so the Sprinker Recreation Center is built in Spanaway, and that and Mark Blau is brought in to run that, and in the 70s and that, and there's a beautiful Olympic-style ice skating rink, and Pacific Lutheran offered all kinds of physical education activities. They had a bowling alley on campus, and they had the usual litany of offerings in that, horseback riding and golf and all that stuff to satisfy your PE requirement. And I said to the dean of the School of Physical Education, my friend Dave Olson, also the athletic director, who's a marvelous person, human being in that, and I mean, had all kinds of honors himself. He was president of the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics when PLU was an NEI school before they turned to NCAA Division III. And that only happened because the Willamette Valley schools in the league wanted to be in Division III and not NEI and stuff. He said, gee, there's a ice rink. And I said to him, he said, we should hire somebody. He looks at me and said, we should hire somebody to teach ice skating down there. I said, me. I grew up on hockey skates. I taught ice skating, beginning ice skating on hockey skates. Remember, I'm not a figure skater. I was a pretty good skater, but on hockey skates. And every semester for 10 years. And I always had a full class of that. So I had all these things going on, and I just couldn't divest myself of anything because I loved doing all of them, but it took an awful lot of time to to do all this stuff. I ran state tournaments. I ran the girls' state A high school tournament every year for 10 years. Well, that happened in late February, early March. This is during baseball season. I was the head baseball coach too. How am I going to be running games all day long from 8 in the morning to 11 at night and run practice at the same time? it was crazy. So, but it was fun. I had a marvelous time. I don't know if I could do that again. I mean, I had a lot of energy. I guess even at my age, I still have quite a bit of energy in that. But I mean, it was kind of silly. I did live a normal life. I didn't really have a social life for that. I just spent all my time. I used to write all day Sundays. We'd go to church in the morning, and then I'd come home and have a lunch, and then I'd go to the office the rest of the day on Sunday and write news releases for a 22 sport, not all in the same season, fortunately, but sometimes it's Monday 6 or 8, and I'd have to phone all the coaches and that and get some highlights. And Gary, well, how the field hockey team? Tell me about your lineup and that for this week's field hockey game, or something like that. And then I'd have a copy to write and take to the printer. Finally, I got a college printer to do this. The printing programs for the next weekend's basketball or football games of that. And then I had a recruiting book. I printed a press guide and that. Not a lot of small colleges had press guides, and I thought we have to have a press guide in that. And so I spent a lot of time in the summer writing that, and so. But I won some awards. We had the recruiting guide 3 times was voted best in the nation of small college schools and stuff. And so we had a lot of fun with those things. But not having a job description could be a blessing instead of a nightmare in that, because you could just say, well, I just won't do this. And in modern years, there's probably a lot of those things that they don't do anymore, simply because it's, in fairness, because with technology now the sports publicist and that probably spends more time keeping up the website than anything else. And be honest with you, I mean, I'm so incompetent in that field, and that I'd be fired if I was there now and 40 years younger than that. They'd say, you're low tech, Jim. I mean, we need somebody that can do this and that. So the whole industry has kind of passed me by. And
I have one more question for you. I've got to know about, did you spend a summer driving around to every major league ballpark?
We did, yeah. And I clarify that. I say driving around. We had this was fun, Gary. No one's ever asked me that. I mean, my family knows this, Matt. Okay, go back now. I mean, this is before you were born. Let me think now. All right, let me think now, because I know when you were in college and that, and think, yeah, this is probably about before you were. Anyway, 1979, Mariners host their first All-Star game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the Kingdom. And my whole family were all there, obviously, and baseball nuts were all there. And my son, Tim, and I, he's the season ticket holder that's had Mariner tickets for, I think, over 30 years. 4 seats, great seats at first base, up about 20 rows from the edge of the dugout, the outfield side of the dugout. And Kevin and I have been in those seats many times. Fabulous seats. They had fabulous seats in the. I think he has other seats there too, but under the name Miles Sand and Gravel. And so after the All-Star game, somebody in the family drives us straight to the Greyhound Depot in downtown Seattle, straight to the Greyhound Depot. Greyhound had advertised a deal, the Greyhound AmeriPass. The Greyhound AmeriPass. I think it was $210 per person. Unlimited travel on Greyhound for 30 days. Unlimited travel. Can you, the price? I mean, the price. So we get on this thing, and of course we motor through Montana, my native Montana, and I can remember all the stops and that. And so we had a cribbage board with us and some cards or something like that to entertain us. My son is a junior in high school, and he plotted the whole thing, the course of the thing. And he could now. He's an MBA, CPA now, not smarter than I am. And so we couldn't take them in order. I mean, in order, geographical order of that. So we had to go to Chicago before we could go to Minneapolis and that, because the twins weren't at home when we got in that part of the country on the bus. So we had to backtrack a little bit through Wisconsin and get back. But we saw all the teams. We went to all the cities in the East and to Toronto and Montreal and that on a budget. I'm not kidding you. On a budget of $600 each.
That's amazing.
Which meant that now we were gone for 26 days. We were allowed 30. We were on 26. But imagine then the lodging situation. So what we did. Greyhound American Pass the seats were quite comfortable, and they had air conditioning in that. So we'd go to ball games by day, and then we'd see but we also saw historical sites. Mm-hmm. I mean, we were at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the United Nations and all the key places. I mean, it wasn't just one dimensional on that. So we would go to games afternoon or evening, and we'd travel at night. We would travel from Pittsburgh to New York, from Cleveland to Pittsburgh, or Cleveland to or something to New York. And Tim, my son Tim, had plotted this, so he knew how long it took to get between A and B from 12 midnight till 7 in the morning, and we'd sleep on the bus. So we only slept in cheapo motels, I think, about 4 or 5 nights in that, and they had to be really cheap in that. And so meals and that, we would go to, there was a place, it was kind of like Walgreens and that had a lunch counter in that. Mm. And you could get breakfast in that, back then. I mean, this is a long time ago. You get breakfast probably for $2 and that, a big breakfast. And then we'd stop at a grocery store someplace, whatever town we were in, at a little mini mart or something, and get a can of tuna in that and some bagels or something for lunch to share in that. So that was cheap. And then we find a cheap place for dinner where we could eat for $5 or something like that at some chain outfit, like a McDonald's, but I'm trying to think of the name of the place in the East. It'll come to me as soon as we get off the line here, and that. And so anyway, but we're sitting in Cincinnati. We're sitting in Cincinnati watching the Reds play, and we knew that Atlanta was on the road. They were on the road, and this wasn't going to work. I mean, the geography didn't pan out, even though son Tim was a skilled planter in that. And we'd already been to Montreal and we'd already been to Toronto and ordered food using my French in a restaurant in the French Quarter of Montreal and that. We couldn't order much because I couldn't remember much from my high school French. And but we were sitting there saying, we'll go back home and people will ask us where we were and where we weren't. And we'd say, well, we were almost everywhere in the Midwest and the East, and that we obviously couldn't go to. I've been to Houston on business when I was with the Giants, and I've been to games in Los Angeles and we didn't anyway. But anyway, in the Midwest, and we saw everything but Atlanta until we were sitting in Cincinnati and saying, we should have gone to Atlanta. And Tim said, they're not at home until next week. We're not even, and we said, we'll go there anyway. So after the game at midnight, we get on a bus from Cincinnati, Ohio, and go to Atlanta and take another bus down to the ballpark, hoping, figuring that I could talk my way in, saying, I used to work in baseball, and big deal. Yeah. Well, what's your name? Well, we never heard of you. And to the security crew and that, and say, look, we've been to all the ballparks in baseball, and here, I know it's, you don't let people in, but I'll leave my wallet for collateral and that. I'll leave my wallet or something, and we'll just walk in to the front row of this second deck and that, and look out on the field, and we'll be right back out. We won't be in there 5 minutes, and he let us in and that. And then he had some balls that he had found in that. So he gave my son a baseball and that. So we came out like a bandit on that one. So then when we got home, we could say, yeah, we were in Atlanta too, but we didn't see a game there. But so anyway, but and Cooperstown, we were at the Hall of Fame, and we stayed. Yeah, we stayed at the hotel on Lake Glimmerglass, and that this fabulous hotel. I was back there 3 years ago. They took me back, my son and his family and grandkids and that, and I went back. Karen's been there also, previously my wife. And we went back for Edgar Martinez induction. Yeah. We were there, had a fabulous time in that, and went to Yankee Stadium, new Yankee Stadium. I've been to old Yankee Stadium in that. But anyway, so anyway, to be gone for 26 days on that kind of a budget and see all the ballparks and see games in most of the parks and was pretty good. And Milwaukee treated us warmly because I'd worked there and that. So they put us in a VIP box, a luxury box and stuff, and fed us and all that stuff up there. And so it was a good time. And probably couldn't do that anymore. It's a little hard on the neck sleeping in the for sleeping 20 nights on the bus. But we were so tired after walking and busing all day and that, and then in the heat of summer and that we survived in that. But we stayed at some pretty dingy places, motels that we for $50 a night or something.
Right.
So we'll never forget that. That was memorable.
That's so great. Jim, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for all the time today. We really appreciate it. This was great.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be invited in that, and we wish the Chatham Sports Museum in Tacoma the best in that in a new location.
Well, this concludes today's presentation. On behalf of Rainier Asphalt and Concrete and the Shanneman Sports Museum of Tacoma, Pierce County, I'd like to thank again our tremendous guest, Jim Kittilsby. Hope you enjoyed both of these for appearing on the show today. I'm Gary Hill. Thank you for joining us on another edition of Locker Room Chat. So long.